The dim light from the ceiling fixtures bathed the small convention center in a warm glow. Elon Musk, dressed in a simple but sharp suit, walked through the hall. This wasn't a grand event like a Tesla unveiling or a SpaceX launch. In fact, it was just a local science fair where young students and aspiring inventors showcased their creative ideas. As Elon moved from booth to booth, he observed with mild curiosity. Some projects caught his attention briefly, a few 3D printed models, AI applications for time management, even a solar-powered car built by a group of high school students. But nothing truly sparked his interest. The future demands more than this, he thought. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the far end of the hall. Elon turned his head to see a small crowd gathering around a particular booth. Intrigued, he walked closer. As he approached, he overheard snippets of astonished conversations. No way. Did this kid do all of this himself? This is way too advanced for a 10-year-old. Curiosity piqued, Elon pushed through the crowd. At the center stood a boy with messy brown hair and hands smudged with grease, his eyes gleaming with confidence. He was gesturing animatedly at a small rocket model displayed on the table in front of him. His voice rang with enthusiasm. This isn't just a model. The fuel system I designed uses a new mixture, optimizing energy output while minimizing emissions. It's 20% more efficient than current designs. Elon froze for a moment, astonished. A 10-year-old? Designing a rocket? Despite his exposure to prodigies and brilliant minds, this was something extraordinary. As Elon moved closer, the boy glanced up, momentarily startled before quickly regaining his composure. The crowd grew silent as someone whispered loudly, "That's Elon Musk." Jacob Taylor, the boy at the center of attention, widened his eyes briefly before a sly smile crept onto his face. "I know who you are," he said confidently, his fingers still pointing at his design. "You're the man bringing humanity closer to Mars. But today, I want to show you that the future isn't just about SpaceX." The crowd chuckled nervously, but Elon didn't seem offended. Instead, he smiled and stepped closer. "Did you build this all by yourself?" he asked, his tone laced with genuine curiosity. "Yes, completely on my own," Jacob replied. "I don't have access to university-level resources, but I've spent months researching online, reading books, and experimenting until I got it right." Elon bent down to examine the rocket model. The design wasn't rudimentary, it was intricate. The parts were meticulously assembled, and the engineering principles reflected a level of sophistication that even seasoned engineers would find impressive. This kid isn't just talented. He's visionary, Elon thought. But instead of praising the boy, he posed a challenging question. "So, what makes your design better than what we're currently doing at SpaceX?" Jacob's smile widened. "You're still using expensive and difficult-to-reuse fuel systems, right? I figured out how to utilize organic compounds instead of heavy metals to cut production costs. It's a small step, but I believe it could revolutionize aerospace engineering." The crowd gasped in awe. Elon nodded slowly. "Interesting. Do you think you can prove this?" "I'm ready," Jacob said without hesitation, his voice steady and confident. Elon straightened up and addressed the boy with a tone of determination. "Then get ready. Tomorrow, I want you to come to SpaceX and convince my engineering team." The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Jacob stood motionless for a moment, torn between excitement and nervousness. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but could he rise to the challenge set by Elon Musk himself? Jacob's heart pounded as he stared up at Elon Musk. The room buzzed with excitement, but to Jacob, the voices were just a blur. Had he just been invited to SpaceX? He blinked, trying to process what had just happened. I'll be there," Jacob stammered, his confident demeanor faltering slightly under the weight of the moment. Elon gave him a nod, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Good. I expect you at 10 a.m. sharp. Don't be late," he said before turning and walking away, the crowd parting to let him through like the Red Sea. Jacob stood frozen as the reality of the situation set in. The crowd began to disperse, and his mom, Emily, rushed over to him. She was a petite woman with a kind face and the same determined spark in her eyes that Jacob had. "Jacob!" she exclaimed, pulling him into a tight hug. Did that just happen? Are you really going to SpaceX tomorrow? Jacob nodded, still dazed. I think so. He said I need to prove my design to his engineering team. Emily pulled back and looked at him with a mix of pride and concern. That's incredible, sweetheart, but this is Elon Musk we're talking about. Are you sure you're ready for this? Jacob's gaze hardened. I've been working on this for months, Mom. I know my design works. I just need them to see it. Emily smiled and ruffled his hair. I know you can do it. Just remember, no matter what happens, I'm proud of you. That evening, Jacob sat in his small bedroom, surrounded by piles of sketches, books, and a laptop that had seen better days. The room smelled faintly of glue and motor oil, remnants of countless late nights spent building prototypes. He stared at the rocket model on his desk. It looked perfect, but his mind raced with doubts. What if they don't take me seriously? What if I forget something important? Shaking his head, Jacob grabbed his notebook and began reviewing his notes for the 100th time. He scribbled equations, double-checked his calculations, and rehearsed how he would explain his design. Think, Jacob, think, he muttered to himself. What's the one thing that will make them listen? Meanwhile, across town, Elon sat in his sleek office, reviewing the notes he'd taken at the science fair. Jacob Taylor, a 10-year-old who spoke about rocket propulsion like it was second nature. What do you think, Gwen? Elon asked, looking up at his assistant, who was standing nearby with a tablet. Gwen raised an eyebrow. About the kid? He's smart, no doubt about that. But SpaceX isn't a playground for science projects. Do you really think he has something worth our time? Elon leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. It's not about the rocket. It's about the mindset. He's bold, unafraid to challenge the status quo. That's the kind of thinking we need if we're going to push humanity forward. Gwen sighed, knowing there was no changing Elon's mind once he'd made a decision. Well, I hope he's ready. The team isn't going to go easy on him. Elon smirked. Good. Neither will I. The next morning, Jacob woke up early, his stomach churning with a mix of excitement and nerves. He dressed in his best clothes, a clean polo shirt and khakis, and carefully packed his rocket model and notes into a sturdy case. Emily drove him to the SpaceX headquarters, her reassuring words filling the silence in the car. Remember, Jacob, this is just another step in your journey. You've got this. As they pulled up to the massive building, Jacob's eyes widened. The SpaceX logo loomed above the entrance, and employees in sleek uniforms buzzed in and out of the building. Taking a deep breath, Jacob stepped out of the car, clutching his case tightly. Emily gave him an encouraging smile. Go show them what you're made of. Jacob nodded and walked toward the entrance, his heart pounding. Inside, he was greeted by a security guard who directed him to the main lobby. As he waited, the sleek, futuristic design of the building only heightened his nerves. The walls were adorned with images of SpaceX rockets and milestones, a constant reminder of the legacy he was about to step into. Jacob Taylor? A voice called, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned to see a tall woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. I'm Gwen. Follow me, she said briskly. Jacob swallowed hard and followed her down a long hallway, his sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished floors. They entered a large conference room where a group of engineers and Elon Musk himself were waiting. Elon looked up and gave Jacob a nod. Welcome to SpaceX, he said. Now, let's see if your rocket can back up that confidence of yours. Jacob's hands trembled slightly as he set up his model on the table. The room was silent, all eyes on him. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. Jacob took a deep breath and looked up at the room full of skeptics. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. I'm here to prove that innovation doesn't have an age limit. The room seemed to grow smaller as Jacob stood before the group of engineers. Their expressions ranged from mild interest to outright skepticism. Elon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, an enigmatic smile on his face. Whenever you're ready, Jacob, Elon said, his voice calm but commanding. Jacob took a deep breath, steadying himself. He unlatched the case and carefully lifted out his rocket model, placing it on the table. The polished aluminum surface gleamed under the bright conference room lights. This, Jacob began, is the next step in space exploration. A murmur rippled through the room. Gwen raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. One of the engineers, a man in his 30s with glasses perched on his nose, leaned forward. And what makes this rocket different from what we've already got? Jacob turned to him, his nerves slowly giving way to determination. It's about efficiency and sustainability. Current rocket designs rely on fuel-heavy systems that make multiple launches costly and resource-draining. My design incorporates a modular propulsion system that recycles expelled gases to optimize thrust. He picked up a pointer and gestured to the diagram displayed on the small screen he'd set up. This is my R-cycle engine. It uses a network of microturbines that capture and redirect waste gases into secondary combustion chambers. That means less fuel is wasted, and the rocket can sustain longer missions with the same amount of fuel. The room fell silent. For a moment, Jacob thought he'd completely lost them. Then, one of the engineers leaned closer to the model, studying it with newfound interest. "You're suggesting a dual-loop system," she said, her tone laced with curiosity. Jacob nodded, his confidence growing. "Exactly. It's not just theoretical. I've built a prototype and tested it in simulations. The results show a 25% increase in fuel efficiency compared to conventional designs." Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, his expression unreadable. "Impressive. But a simulation isn't reality. What about structural integrity? Heat management during re-entry? Have you accounted for those variables?" Jacob's heart skipped a beat, but he quickly recovered. "Yes, I have," he said, pulling out another diagram. "The rocket shell is made of a titanium alloy with a graphene coating to withstand extreme heat and pressure. I've also incorporated a thermal dispersion system that channels excess heat away from critical components during re-entry." The skeptical engineer from earlier frowned. "And how did a 10-year-old kid figure all of this out?" Jacob straightened his back, meeting the man's gaze head-on. "By asking questions no one else was asking and refusing to stop until I found the answers." Elon chuckled softly, breaking the tension. Spoken like a true innovator. As the presentation continued, Jacob walked them through every detail of his design, from the propulsion system to the materials used. He answered their questions with precision and clarity, his passion shining through. By the end, the room was filled with a charged silence. The engineers exchanged glances, some nodding subtly. Gwen, who had been scribbling notes on her tablet, finally spoke. "Impressive," she admitted, though her tone remained neutral. "But what's the next step? What do you want from us?" Jacob hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I want SpaceX to help me turn this into reality. I know I can't do it alone, but with your resources and expertise, we can build a rocket that changes the future of space travel." Elon leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto Jacob. "And why should we take that risk on you? What makes you different from the thousands of engineers out there who'd kill for this opportunity?" Jacob didn't blink. "Because I'm not afraid to fail. And I'm not afraid to dream bigger than anyone else. You said it yourself, Mr. Musk. Humanity needs bold thinkers to move forward. I'm here to prove that age doesn't matter when it comes to changing the world." The room fell silent again, the weight of Jacob's words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, Elon nodded. "All right, Jacob, let's see if you've got what it takes. You'll work with our team for a week. If your design holds up to real-world testing, we'll talk about the next steps." Jacob's eyes widened. "Really? You mean it?" Elon smirked. "I don't say things I don't mean. But don't get too comfortable. This is just the beginning. The real challenge starts now." Gwen stepped forward, handing Jacob a folder. "Here's your schedule. Be here at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late." Jacob clutched the folder tightly, his mind racing. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Elon stood, extending a hand. "Welcome to SpaceX, Jacob." As Jacob shook Elon's hand, a surge of determination coursed through him. This was his chance to prove himself, and he wasn't going to waste it. As Jacob walked out of the conference room, his mind buzzing with excitement, he didn't notice the two engineers whispering to each other. "Do you really think the kid's design will hold up?" one asked. The other shrugged. "It's ambitious, but the math checks out. Still, there's one thing he hasn't accounted for yet." "What's that?" "The unexpected." Jacob's heart raced as he arrived at the SpaceX headquarters the next morning. The early sunlight reflected off the sleek metallic surfaces of the futuristic campus, a place that looked more like a set from a sci-fi movie than a real-world workspace. He clutched the folder Gwen had handed him the day before, scanning its contents for the third time. Each line outlined his schedule, the team members he would work with, and the expectations for his design. As he stepped inside the testing lab, he was greeted by the hum of machinery and the faint smell of ozone. Engineers were bustling around, reviewing blueprints, monitoring screens, and discussing designs in animated tones. At the center of the chaos stood Gwen, her sharp eyes immediately locking onto Jacob. "You're on time. Good start," she said briskly, motioning for him to follow. Jacob hurried after her, barely able to keep up with her long strides. "What's the plan for today?" he asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and nervousness. "We're starting with a feasibility assessment of your design. Our team has already reviewed your diagrams, and now we'll see how your prototype holds up under scrutiny," Gwen explained. She glanced down at him. "This isn't school science fair stuff, Jacob. If you've overlooked anything, we'll know." The testing room was a marvel of engineering, a massive space filled with advanced equipment Jacob had only dreamed of seeing. A life-sized replica of his rocket design had been constructed overnight, based on the blueprints he provided. Jacob's jaw dropped as he took in the sight of it. This is incredible," he whispered. Gwen gave a small smirk. "We move fast here. Let's see if your design is worth the effort." The first test involved a structural integrity simulation. The engineers placed the rocket model into a specialized chamber that mimicked the pressures and vibrations it would endure during launch. Jacob watched anxiously from behind a glass wall as the machine roared to life. Seconds felt like hours as the model was subjected to increasing stress. Readouts flashed on a nearby screen, showing data that Jacob struggled to interpret at the pace it appeared. Finally, the machine powered down, and an engineer called out, "No critical failures." Structure held up under maximum stress. Jacob let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Next came the propulsion test. The prototype's R-cycle engine was hooked up to a thrust simulator, and the room filled with anticipation. This was the moment that would make or break Jacob's design. One of the engineers glanced at Elon, who had entered the room moments earlier, observing silently. "Ready when you are, sir." Elon nodded. "Start it up." The simulator roared to life, and Jacob's engine sputtered for a moment before stabilizing. Flames shot out of the exhaust ports, the system coming alive in a way that made Jacob's heart soar. The thrust levels climbed steadily, the readings on the screen matching the projections Jacob had calculated. "Thrust efficiency at 94%, one of the engineers announced. "Better than most of our current designs." A round of murmurs spread through the room. Gwen raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed but unwilling to show it. Elon, however, wore a small, satisfied smile. "Well done, Jacob," Elon said. "But there's still more work to do. Efficiency is one thing. Real-world application is another." After hours of testing, Gwen handed Jacob a clipboard filled with notes and suggestions. "Your design passed the first round, but it's far from perfect," she said, her tone critical but not dismissive. "You need to address heat dispersion during sustained thrust and fine-tune the fuel cycling process. These issues might not seem like a big deal now, but they could cause catastrophic failures in space." Jacob nodded, absorbing her feedback like a sponge. "I'll get to work on it right away." "Good," Gwen replied. "You've got 48 hours to make revisions before the next round of testing." As she walked away, Jacob sat down at a nearby desk, already sketching out solutions to the problems she'd pointed out. The enormity of the task weighed heavily on him, but he refused to let it deter him. Late that night, Jacob found himself alone in the lab, surrounded by blueprints and calculations. His eyelids grew heavy, but his determination kept him going. He thought about the countless hours he'd spent working on his rocket in his garage, fueled by little more than curiosity and a dream. Now, he was on the cusp of something extraordinary. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. "You're still here?" Jacob looked up to see Elon standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. He walked over and handed one to Jacob. "Thanks," Jacob said, taking a sip. Elon sat down across from him, studying the scattered papers. You remind me of myself at your age. I didn't have all the answers, but I had the drive to find them. That's what matters. Jacob hesitated before asking, "Do you think I can really do this? Build something that changes the world?" Elon's expression softened. "You've already done more than most people twice your age. But big ideas come with big challenges. The question isn't whether you can do it. It's whether you're willing to keep going when things get tough." Jacob nodded, his resolve strengthening. "I won't give up." "Good," Elon said, standing up. "Then you'll do just fine." As Jacob returned to his work, a shadowy figure watched him from the far end of the lab. The figure pulled out a phone and whispered, "We might have a problem. The kid's design is better than we expected." The next morning, Jacob woke up slumped over his desk, his face pressed against a pile of calculations. He groggily wiped a line of ink from his cheek and blinked at the scattered blueprints around him. The hum of the lab was already alive as engineers and technicians began their work. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 7 a.m. He had barely slept, but he felt an electric buzz of motivation coursing through him. Today was another chance to refine his design, to take it to the next level. Gwen strode into the room, her voice sharp as always. "You look like you've been hit by a truck," she remarked, eyeing Jacob's rumpled hair and dark circles. Jacob chuckled nervously. "I stayed up making revisions to the fuel cycling process and addressing the heat dispersion issue. I think I've figured out a way to integrate an auxiliary cooling system that draws minimal power." Gwen arched an eyebrow and reached for the blueprint Jacob handed her. "Auxiliary cooling? Interesting choice. Let's see if it actually works." As Gwen walked off to analyze his updates, Jacob noticed Elon standing in the corner of the lab, deep in conversation with another engineer. But something, or someone, caught Jacob's eye. Across the room, a man in a dark suit lingered near a row of monitors, his posture stiff and his gaze sharp. Jacob frowned. He hadn't seen this man before, and his presence didn't feel right. The man seemed out of place among the casually dressed engineers and technicians. As if sensing Jacob's scrutiny, the man turned and disappeared through a side door. A chill ran down Jacob's spine, but he brushed it off. "Focus on the task, Jacob. There's no time for distractions." Later that afternoon, Jacob's refined prototype was prepped for its second round of testing. A cluster of engineers gathered around, murmuring in low tones. The tension in the air was palpable. "All right, everyone," Gwen called out, commanding the room's attention. "This is where we separate fantasy from reality. Let's see if the kid's fixes hold up." The model was placed into the thrust chamber again, and the simulation began. The room fell silent except for the low hum of the machinery. Jacob's heart pounded as he watched the data stream across the monitor. "Temperature levels are stable," an engineer reported. "Fuel cycling efficiency increased to 98%, another added, clearly impressed. The room erupted into scattered applause, but Jacob barely noticed. His eyes were glued to the screen, tracking every fluctuation, every variable. He knew this was only one hurdle. The real test was yet to come. As the team wrapped up the day's tests, Elon approached Jacob with a rare look of approval. "You've got something special here, Jacob. We'll run one final round of tests tomorrow, but so far, your design is exceeding expectations." Jacob grinned, a mixture of relief and pride washing over him. "Thank you, Mr. Musk. I won't let you down." Elon patted him on the shoulder. "I don't think you will." That evening, Jacob returned to the lab to review the day's data, unable to resist the urge to refine his design further. The lab was eerily quiet, the usual buzz of activity replaced by the occasional beep of a monitor. As he worked, he heard faint footsteps echoing down the hall. He froze, his pencil hovering over his notebook. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing back to him. No answer. Jacob shook his head. "You're just tired," he told himself. But the uneasy feeling lingered. A few minutes later, as he adjusted a diagram on his screen, he noticed something strange. A window he hadn't opened popped up on his monitor. It was blank, except for one flashing cursor. Before Jacob could react, lines of code began streaming across the screen. Panic surged through him as he realized someone was hacking into the system. He reached for the keyboard, trying to shut it down, but the cursor froze. "System override in progress," a robotic voice announced. Jacob's heart raced as he grabbed his phone to call for help. Before he could dial, the screen went black. The lab doors burst open, and Gwen stormed in, her face a mixture of fury and alarm. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "I don't know," Jacob stammered. "Someone was trying to access the system. I couldn't stop it." Gwen's sharp gaze swept the room. "This lab is supposed to be on a secure network. Whoever did this had inside access." Just then, Elon appeared, his expression grim. "We've been compromised," he said, his voice low but firm. "Jacob, did you notice anything unusual before this happened?" Jacob hesitated before describing the man in the dark suit he had seen earlier. Elon exchanged a glance with Gwen. "We'll handle it," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "For now, you focus on your work. We'll ensure this doesn't happen again." As Jacob left the lab that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He glanced over his shoulder, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Little did he know, the man in the dark suit was still there, lurking in the shadows, speaking quietly into his phone. "Phase 1 complete. Keep an eye on the boy. He's more of a threat than we anticipated." Jacob woke up the next morning feeling restless. His mind lingered on the unsettling events from the night before. The strange man, the system hack, and Elon's cryptic words. As much as he wanted to focus on his rocket design, he couldn't shake the sense that something bigger was happening behind the scenes. Arriving at the lab, Jacob noticed a heightened sense of urgency among the staff. Security guards were stationed at every entrance, and Elon was already in the control room, talking animatedly with Gwen and a few other high-level engineers. The air felt tense, charged with unspoken worry. "Jacob," Gwen called out as he entered, "we need to run a full diagnostic on your prototype. We have to make sure nothing was tampered with during last night's breach." Jacob nodded, his stomach tightening. "Do you think someone's trying to sabotage us?" Gwen hesitated, then said, "I don't know, but we're not taking any chances." The next few hours were grueling. Every component of Jacob's design was meticulously examined, from the fuel lines to the propulsion system. As the team worked, Jacob noticed Elon pacing in the background, his expression unreadable. Finally, the head engineer declared, "No anomalies detected. The prototype is clean." Jacob let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But Elon didn't look relieved. If anything, his frown deepened. "We're not just dealing with corporate espionage," Elon finally said, his voice low. "Whoever did this wasn't after random data. They wanted access to Jacob's design." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. "My design? But why?" "Because it's revolutionary," Elon said simply. "And revolutionary ideas attract both admirers and enemies. Someone out there doesn't want us to succeed." Before Jacob could respond, the lab's main monitor flickered to life. A message appeared on the screen, written in bold, red letters. "You're playing a dangerous game, Musk. Back off, or face the consequences." The room went silent as everyone stared at the ominous message. Then the screen went black. "That's it," Elon said, his voice steel. "Increase security protocols. Gwen, make sure every device in this lab is isolated from external networks. Jacob, come with me." Jacob followed Elon into a private conference room. For the first time since they'd met, Elon looked genuinely concerned. "I don't want to scare you, Jacob," Elon began, "but you need to understand what's at stake here. Your design isn't just another rocket. It's a blueprint for the future of space travel. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could be weaponized or used to set humanity back decades." Jacob swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" "We move forward," Elon said firmly. "But from now on, you'll be under strict supervision. No working late alone in the lab, and no discussing your work with anyone outside this team. Understand?" Jacob nodded, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. That evening, Jacob returned home under the watchful eyes of a security escort. He tried to focus on his notes, but his mind kept drifting back to the warning message. Who would go to such lengths to stop us? As he stared out the window, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "They're closer than you think. Trust no one." Jacob's blood ran cold. He wanted to show the message to Elon, but a part of him hesitated. What if the warning was right? What if the threat was coming from someone on the inside? Jacob deleted the message and locked his phone, determined to keep moving forward despite his growing unease. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit room miles away, the man in the dark suit reviewed surveillance footage of Jacob in the lab. "He's smarter than we anticipated," the man muttered, tapping a pin against the table. "But everyone has a weakness. Let's find his." The next morning, Jacob arrived at the lab to find the entire team buzzing with nervous energy. Today was the day, the first test flight of his prototype. Months of work and sleepless nights had led to this moment, and Jacob could feel the weight of it pressing down on his shoulders. Elon greeted him at the door with a firm handshake. "How are you holding up, Jacob? Ready to watch your creation take to the skies?" Jacob nodded, though his palms were clammy. "As ready as I'll ever be. Just hoping everything goes smoothly." "It will," Elon reassured him. "We've triple-checked every component. If there's one thing I know, it's that your design is solid." The team gathered at the test site, a vast open field with a clear blue sky overhead. The prototype rocket, standing tall on the launch pad, gleamed in the sunlight. Its sleek design and innovative features made it look more futuristic than anything Jacob had ever dreamed of. Seeing it fully assembled took his breath away. "Okay, everyone," Gwen announced, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We're proceeding with the countdown. All systems are green. Jacob, care to say a few words before we begin?" Jacob hesitated, then stepped forward, his heart pounding. "This rocket isn't just a machine. It's a symbol of what's possible when we dare to dream big. I hope this test inspires everyone here to keep pushing boundaries and reaching for the stars. Thank you for believing in me." The team erupted into applause, and Jacob couldn't help but smile, despite his nerves. As the countdown began, Jacob watched the monitor displaying the rocket's diagnostics. Everything looked perfect: fuel levels, pressure readings, engine status. But a small knot of anxiety refused to leave his chest. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch. The rocket roared to life, flames shooting out of its engines as it lifted off the ground. Jacob held his breath as the prototype soared higher and higher, its trajectory smooth and steady. Cheers erupted around him as the rocket passed its first milestone, breaking through the lower atmosphere without a hitch. Jacob allowed himself a small sigh of relief. "That's it," Gwen said, her voice filled with pride. "She's flying beautifully." But just as the rocket reached its second milestone, the monitor began flashing red. "Warning," an automated voice announced. "Engine pressure anomaly detected." Jacob's heart sank. "What's happening?" he demanded, his eyes glued to the screen. "Engine pressure is spiking," one of the engineers replied, frantically typing on their console. "If it continues, we'll lose control." "Elon, we have to abort," Gwen shouted. "No," Jacob interjected, surprising everyone. "Wait, give me a minute." Jacob's mind raced as he reviewed the data flooding the screen. The anomaly wasn't random. It was the result of an intentional override in the system. Someone had tampered with the rocket. "Elon, this isn't a malfunction. It's sabotage," Jacob said urgently. "But I think I can bypass it." "Do it," Elon said without hesitation. Jacob's fingers flew across the keyboard, inputting a manual override to reroute the engine's pressure systems. The room fell silent as everyone watched, tension thick in the air. "Come on," Jacob whispered under his breath. The monitor flickered, then stabilized. "Engine pressure normalized," the automated voice announced. The room erupted in cheers once again, but Jacob didn't celebrate. He knew this wasn't over. The rocket completed its final milestone and returned safely to the ground. The team gathered around it, inspecting every inch for damage. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling of dread lingering in his chest. As the team celebrated, Elon pulled Jacob aside. "You saved the test flight," Elon said, his tone serious. "But you were right. Someone's trying to sabotage us. We need to find out who." Jacob nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes. We can't let them win." Later that night, Jacob received another message from the unknown number. "Impressive save today. But next time, you won't be so lucky." Jacob stared at the screen, his jaw clenched. Whoever was behind this wasn't just targeting the rocket, they were targeting him. The message burned in Jacob's mind long after he received it. He had stared at the text for hours, replaying the events of the test flight over and over in his head. Someone had intentionally sabotaged the rocket. Someone within their team. Someone he might have shaken hands with earlier that day. Jacob felt a mix of anger and determination. He wasn't just a kid with a dream anymore. He was a key player in something much larger, and he refused to let anyone stand in his way. The next morning, Jacob arrived at the lab earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the building. Inside, the hum of machines was the only sound, and the usually bustling workspace felt eerily quiet. Elon was already there, pacing near the main workstation. Couldn't sleep either? Elon asked without looking up. Jacob shook his head. No. That message, it wasn't just a threat. It's a challenge. Whoever this is, they're trying to prove they can outsmart us. Elon nodded. And they almost did. If it weren't for you, that rocket would have been a disaster. But now we need to act. I've already initiated an internal investigation. No one leaves the lab until we figure this out. The team began scouring through logs and surveillance footage, looking for any clues. Jacob felt the weight of suspicion hanging in the air. Every glance felt scrutinized, every move questioned. He hated the idea of doubting the people who had worked so hard alongside him, but he knew it was necessary. The monitor flickered, then stabilized. Engine pressure normalized, the automated voice announced. The room erupted in cheers once again, but Jacob didn't celebrate. He knew this wasn't over. The rocket completed its final milestone and returned safely to the ground. The team gathered around it, inspecting every inch for damage. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling of dread lingering in his chest. As the team celebrated, Elon pulled Jacob aside. "You saved the test flight," Elon said, his tone serious. "But you were right. Someone's trying to sabotage us. We need to find out who." Jacob nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes. We can't let them win." Later that night, Jacob received another message from the unknown number. "Impressive save today. But next time, you won't be so lucky." Jacob stared at the screen, his jaw clenched. Whoever was behind this wasn't just targeting the rocket, they were targeting him. The message burned in Jacob's mind long after he received it. He had stared at the text for hours, replaying the events of the test flight over and over in his head. Someone had intentionally sabotaged the rocket. Someone within their team. Someone he might have shaken hands with earlier that day. Jacob felt a mix of anger and determination. He wasn't just a kid with a dream anymore. He was a key player in something much larger, and he refused to let anyone stand in his way. The next morning, Jacob arrived at the lab earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the building. Inside, the hum of machines was the only sound, and the usually bustling workspace felt eerily quiet. Elon was already there, pacing near the main workstation. Couldn't sleep either? Elon asked without looking up. Jacob shook his head. No. That message, it wasn't just a threat. It's a challenge. Whoever this is, they're trying to prove they can outsmart us. Elon nodded. And they almost did. If it weren't for you, that rocket would have been a disaster. But now we need to act. I've already initiated an internal investigation. No one leaves the lab until we figure this out. The team began scouring through logs and surveillance footage, looking for any clues. Jacob felt the weight of suspicion hanging in the air. Every glance felt scrutinized, every move questioned. He hated the idea of doubting the people who had worked so hard alongside him, but he knew it was necessary. I did. But I figured you'd still be here, Elon said with a small smile. You're not one to give up easily. Jacob explained what he had found, showing Elon the masked code. This is impressive work, Elon said, his expression serious. Whoever did this knows their way around systems. But if they're trying this hard to cover their tracks, it means we're close. Close to what? Jacob asked. Close to uncovering the truth, Elon replied. Together, they worked late into the night, piecing together what little clues they had. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Small anomalies in the lab systems that had gone unnoticed until now. Each one pointed to a single workstation, but when they checked the records, the name associated with it sent a chill down Jacob's spine. Gwen? Jacob whispered, disbelief written all over his face. Elon frowned. Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll confront her in the morning. As Jacob left the lab that night, his phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. You're getting warmer, but some fires can't be extinguished. Jacob's resolve hardened. Whoever was behind this, they were playing a dangerous game, and he was determined to win. Jacob's mind raced as he lay awake in bed, the mysterious message from the night before replaying in his thoughts. Some fires can't be extinguished. What did that even mean? He had no idea who was behind this sabotage, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he wasn't just dealing with a disgruntled employee or a random hacker. This was personal. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not now. His entire future was on the line, and so was Elon's ambitious vision. But could he really trust Gwen? The evidence was pointing toward her, but part of him refused to believe it. She had always been loyal, always had his back. Yet, as the pieces started to fit together, doubt crept in. Could someone so close be so devious? The next morning, Jacob arrived at the lab early, before anyone else. His heart thudded in his chest as he stood outside the doors, the cool air of the early morning sharp against his skin. Elon had been right to tell him not to jump to conclusions, but the weight of the situation was almost too much to bear. If Gwen was involved, it would shatter everything he believed about trust and loyalty. He walked into the lab, already feeling the heavy atmosphere that seemed to hang over the place. The other engineers were gathered around, speaking in hushed tones. Jacob could feel their eyes on him, their silent questions pressing into his chest. The team knew something was wrong, but no one was brave enough to voice it. Elon was already there, his face grim. Jacob, we need to talk. Now. Jacob followed Elon into the main conference room, his stomach in knots. Gwen was already there, her expression unreadable. She didn't meet Jacob's eyes. You've seen the data, haven't you? Elon said, his voice low. Jacob nodded, trying to ignore the cold sweat forming on his palms. I have. Elon crossed his arms. And you saw the same things I did? Jacob swallowed hard. I'm not sure, but I think we're being led in the wrong direction. What do you mean? Gwen asked, her voice tense. Jacob hesitated. He knew what he had to do, but it felt like tearing apart the very fabric of their teamwork. There's something in the code, Jacob said. Something that links back to one of the workstations here. It's tied to you, Gwen. Gwen's eyes widened, but she didn't speak. Elon, Jacob continued, I've traced the code. It came from her station, the one we've been using for development. For a long moment, there was silence. Gwen looked at Elon, then back at Jacob. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight. Elon, I don't know what Jacob is talking about, Gwen said, her voice shaky. I didn't do anything. Jacob felt his heart race. He didn't want to believe her, but the evidence was clear. Yet, there was something about her tone that made him question everything. Elon, I swear, I'm not involved, Gwen said, her voice breaking now. I've been working here for years. I would never betray you, not after everything we've built together. Elon stepped forward, his eyes hard and piercing. Then explain this, Gwen. He placed a tablet on the table, showing the exact line of code Jacob had found the night before. Gwen's face went white as she stared at the screen. No, I didn't put that there, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't even know what that is. But the disbelief in her eyes didn't match the mounting evidence. Jacob could see the conflict in her expression, fear, guilt, and something else he couldn't quite place. Elon's voice was quiet, but firm. We'll need to review your access logs. You're the only one with the credentials to create this kind of code. You need to tell us the truth, Gwen. Gwen's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting around the room. The silence was deafening. Finally, she broke it. I didn't do it, she said, her voice sharp with frustration. But I know who did. Elon and Jacob exchanged a quick glance, their attention now fully on Gwen. Who? Jacob demanded. Gwen hesitated. I didn't want to say this, but it's Alex. He's been acting strange for weeks, ever since the contract with SpaceX went public. I've seen him in the lab late at night, working on his own. He kept asking questions about the rocket's weaknesses, about how we could make it better, faster, cheaper. I thought he was just being ambitious, but now I realize it was more than that. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. Alex? It made sense. Alex had always been overly ambitious, and he'd never liked the attention Jacob had been getting. If anyone had the motivation to sabotage the project, it was Alex. Elon nodded. All right, we'll confront him, but we need solid proof. Jacob felt a surge of adrenaline. They were on the brink of uncovering the truth, and he wasn't going to let anyone stop him now. Just as they were about to leave the room, the lab's security alarms went off, blaring throughout the building. Someone's tampered with the system, Elon said, his voice tight with urgency. It's too late. Whoever did this, they're already one step ahead. The blaring of the security alarms rattled the room, sending a wave of panic through the team. Elon's expression tightened with urgency as he motioned for Jacob and Gwen to follow him. Their footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as they hurried toward the security room. Jacob's mind raced, each thought more urgent than the last. Whoever had tampered with the system was already trying to cover their tracks. Check the cameras, Elon barked at one of the techs stationed in the security room. The technician, a young man named Carlos, quickly typed commands into the system. His eyes flickered across the screens, his face growing increasingly tense. There's nothing, Carlos said, shaking his head. The footage has been wiped clean from the last 48 hours. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Elon's jaw clenched. Alex, do you think it's him? Gwen asked, her voice shaky. She had been silent since revealing her suspicion, still visibly shaken by the accusations. We need to move fast, Elon said, not answering her question directly. We can't waste time speculating. Jacob, check Alex's office. I'm heading to the main lab. Jacob sprinted down the hallway, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he tried to process everything that had just happened. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. If Alex had done this, they needed to stop him before it was too late. He reached Alex's office and slammed the door open. The small, cluttered space was eerily quiet. Papers and tech manuals were scattered across the desk, but there was no sign of Alex. Jacob began to search through the drawers, pulling out files and glancing through them quickly. His fingers froze when he came across something that stood out, a blueprint. It was a design for a new rocket propulsion system, one that looked eerily similar to their own project, but with modifications that didn't sit right. Jacob's mind raced. This wasn't just sabotage, it was theft. He stuffed the blueprint into his jacket and turned to leave when he noticed something else. A small flash drive lying on the floor beneath the desk. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He knew the significance of that flash drive. It was the kind used to store sensitive data. He grabbed it, stuffing it into his pocket before running out of the office. Meanwhile, Elon and Gwen had reached the main lab. It was clear that someone had been there recently. The workstation screens were left on, their displays frozen, showing calculations for the rocket's final stage. But the more Elon observed, the more he realized something wasn't right. Gwen, you see this? Elon pointed to a set of commands on the screen that didn't belong. It was clear someone had been fiddling with the code, perhaps trying to cover their tracks. Gwen nodded, her brow furrowed. This wasn't just a simple mistake. Someone's been deliberately altering things. We need to go after Alex now, Elon said. It's time to end this. He's not just trying to sabotage the project anymore. He's trying to steal it. Back in the security room, Carlos's frantic typing echoed through the tense silence. I'm trying to track him down, he said. But it's like he's wiped all of his access logs too. There's no trace. Jacob entered the room just as Carlos spoke. He quickly rushed over to the technician's side, pulling the flash drive from his pocket. I found this in Alex's office. Carlos's eyes widened as he connected the flash drive to the terminal. The screen flickered, and a flood of encrypted data began to load. This is bad, Carlos muttered, scanning the files. There's a full blueprint of the rocket here, and something else. It looks like a backdoor program, a way to remotely access the lab servers. Jacob's stomach twisted with dread. What does this mean? It means Alex was planning to steal the entire project, Carlos said. And he has the means to cover his tracks if he gets away. Back in the lab, Elon and Gwen stood in silence, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. "This is worse than we thought," Gwen said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex didn't just want to disrupt the project. He was going to steal everything, take it for himself. "We can't let him get away with it," Elon replied, his eyes hard with determination. "Jacob, did you find anything?" Jacob entered, holding up the flash drive. "This is it. We have everything we need." Elon took the drive from Jacob, his expression intense. "We can use this to prove everything. But we have to find Alex first. We don't have much time." The hunt for Alex was on. The team split up, scouring the facility. Jacob's heart pounded as he dashed through the halls, his mind focused solely on the task at hand. He couldn't let this slide. Alex had crossed a line, and it was up to them to stop him before it was too late. He reached the garage, where the lab's private vehicles were kept. The door was slightly ajar, and Jacob hesitated for only a moment before entering. He didn't know if Alex was still here, but his gut told him he was close. And then he heard it. A loud engine revved in the distance. Jacob's eyes widened. Alex was making his escape. Jacob ran outside, spotting a figure speeding toward the exit in a sleek black sports car. It was Alex. The chase had begun. "Elon, Gwen!" Jacob shouted into his earpiece, his heart racing. "He's escaping. We need to stop him now." The car swerved and sped down the road, disappearing into the horizon as Jacob jumped into the closest vehicle, determined to catch up. Jacob's hands gripped the steering wheel as the engine roared to life, the wheels screeching on the pavement. His pulse was racing, his mind focused solely on the road ahead. He couldn't let Alex escape. There was too much at stake now. The entire project, the lives of everyone involved, were hanging in the balance. "Elon, Gwen, I'm in pursuit." Jacob's voice was steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. "I'm going after him." "Elon here," came the reply, his tone grave. "Be careful, Jacob. This isn't just about the rocket anymore. If Alex is willing to steal it, he's capable of anything." Jacob's grip tightened as he pushed the pedal to the metal. "I know. I won't let him get away." The sleek black sports car was a blur ahead of him, weaving through traffic with ease. Alex was clearly an experienced driver, but Jacob wasn't about to let that intimidate him. His mind was sharp, focused. He had trained for this, both behind the wheel and in life. But the pressure was mounting. The speed at which Alex was driving made every second count. If Jacob didn't catch him soon, Alex would be long gone. He glanced at the GPS. The road ahead was empty for miles, perfect for a high-speed chase. Jacob pushed harder, his car gaining on Alex's at an alarming rate. The world outside was a blur of streetlights, signs, and darkened shapes. Jacob's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Gwen's car was a few hundred meters behind him, staying close but not getting in the way. Elon, meanwhile, was coordinating their efforts from the base, tracking their movements with the help of Carlos in the security room. "Jacob, you're closing the gap," Gwen's voice crackled over the comms. "But you need to be careful. There's no telling what Alex might do next." "Understood," Jacob replied, his voice cool, despite the rush of fear and anticipation swirling inside him. Up ahead, Alex's car suddenly swerved, veering onto a side road. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He had to make a decision: follow him and risk getting lost, or maintain the current speed and try to intercept him at the next intersection. His instincts kicked in. Jacob made the split-second choice to follow. With a quick flick of the steering wheel, he turned onto the side road, barely avoiding the sharp curve. The chase was now taking them farther from the city, into the open country roads. The trees were thick, and the night was darker here. There was no way of knowing if Alex was planning to lead them into a trap, or if he was simply trying to lose them in the unfamiliar terrain. But Jacob wasn't about to back down now. He could see the faint headlights of Alex's car up ahead, twisting and turning in the winding roads. It was clear that Alex knew these roads better than he did. But Jacob wasn't going to let that stop him. He pushed forward, navigating the turns with precision. Suddenly, Alex's car slammed on the brakes. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. It was a trap. Before he could react, Alex's car came to a sudden stop, and Jacob found himself speeding toward the rear of the vehicle, unable to avoid the collision. His instincts kicked in, and he swerved just in time, narrowly missing the back end of Alex's car. He skidded to a stop, heart pounding in his chest. "Jacob, are you okay?" Gwen's voice came through the earpiece, frantic. "What just happened?" "I'm fine," Jacob said, shaking off the shock. "Alex is trying to lose us. He's got a plan." The night was still, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, in the distance, a faint sound, an engine roaring to life. Alex had started moving again. "Damn it," Jacob muttered under his breath. "He's getting away." With renewed determination, Jacob slammed the pedal to the metal. The chase had become personal now. Alex had stolen from them, betrayed their trust, and Jacob wasn't going to let him escape. He had to stop him, no matter the cost. Up ahead, Alex's car was weaving through the narrow roads, but Jacob was gaining on him. He could see the red glow of the brake lights flicker as Alex took a sharp turn. Jacob was right on his tail. "Elon, Gwen, I'm almost there," Jacob said, his voice sharp. "Get ready." Suddenly, Alex's car jerked to the right, heading straight for a thick, wooded area. There was no way out there, only trees and thick brush. Jacob didn't hesitate. He knew Alex was cornered. As he rounded the bend, Jacob's heart dropped into his stomach. Alex had driven straight into a narrow, dead-end road, a long stretch that abruptly ended in a steep drop. Jacob was so close now that he could almost see the sweat on Alex's forehead through the rearview mirror. Elon's voice crackled through his earpiece again. "Jacob, you're almost there. Don't let him make another move." But just as Jacob was about to close in, Alex threw the car into reverse, slamming into Jacob's vehicle. The impact was enough to jolt Jacob, knocking him off course. His car spun out of control, screeching as it collided with the guardrail at the edge of the road. "Jacob!" Gwen's voice shouted. "No!" Jacob's vision blurred for a moment, but he fought to regain control of the car. His hands were steady, his mind clear. Alex had made his move. Now it was time for Jacob to make his. Jacob gritted his teeth, watching as Alex's car sped toward the cliff's edge. Alex was cornered, but would he take the dangerous leap to escape, or would Jacob catch him before he could get away? Jacob's hands gripped the wheel tightly as he recovered from the spin, his heart pounding in his chest. The screeching of the tires still rang in his ears, but he quickly focused on the road ahead. His eyes were locked on Alex's car, which had reached the end of the narrow, dead-end road. There was nowhere to go now, just the steep drop that led to a jagged ravine. "Elon, Gwen," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. "Alex is cornered. He can't go anywhere." "Be careful," Elon replied, his voice low but urgent. "If he's desperate enough, he might do something reckless." Jacob's breath came in sharp bursts as he eased his car into a position that blocked Alex's only possible route of escape. The two vehicles were now mere feet apart, and Jacob could see the tension in Alex's eyes, even from this distance. "Alex," Jacob called out through the loudspeaker, his voice calm but firm. "This is over. Get out of the car." For a moment, there was no response. Alex's car remained idling, its engine growling softly in the silence of the night. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the faint hum of distant highway traffic. Then, to Jacob's surprise, Alex slammed the door open and stepped out of the car. His eyes were wild, his face twisted with a mix of defiance and fear. "You think you can stop me?" Alex shouted, his voice raw with anger. "You think you've won? You don't understand what's at stake here." Jacob's grip tightened on the wheel, but he remained calm. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This was it. Alex was dangerous, but Jacob wasn't going to let him escape again. "I understand more than you think," Jacob replied, stepping out of his car slowly. "This isn't about the rocket. It's about trust. You betrayed all of us." Alex's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Trust? You think you're the good guy here? I'm not the one who's been playing with people's lives. You think this project is all about progress, but it's a game to you, something to make you more powerful." Jacob shook his head, taking a few careful steps toward Alex. "You don't get it. We were trying to change the world, to make a better future. But you—" "Don't lecture me," Alex interrupted, his voice rising. You have no idea what it's like to feel trapped, to be used by people like you. I built that rocket, not you. I deserve to be in control. Jacob's gaze hardened. That's where you're wrong. You had the chance to make a difference, but you chose to take it all for yourself. For a long moment, there was only silence between them. The wind picked up, whipping through the trees, but neither man moved. Jacob could see the desperation in Alex's eyes, the wild look of someone on the edge of losing everything. I don't want to hurt you, Jacob said softly, his voice calm but firm. But if you try to run, I won't hesitate. Alex's chest heaved with emotion, but his eyes narrowed in defiance. Then you're just like them. Suddenly, Alex turned and sprinted toward the edge of the ravine, his movements frantic, as if he had no other choice but to make a desperate leap for freedom. Alex, stop! Jacob shouted, but it was too late. In one fluid motion, Alex leaped off the edge, disappearing into the darkness below. Jacob's heart dropped into his stomach. Time seemed to stretch in those few seconds as he stood frozen, staring into the empty space where Alex had just been. Elon Gwyn, Jacob said, his voice shaking slightly. He jumped. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Elon's voice came through, calm but tense. Are you sure? He could still be alive. I don't know, Jacob replied, his voice heavy with disbelief. He didn't hesitate. I don't know what he was thinking. Gwen spoke next, her voice filled with concern. Jacob, we need to find him. He's dangerous, but he's still a part of this project. If he's alive, we need to know why he did it. Jacob stood at the edge of the ravine, staring down into the darkness. It was a long drop, and he could see nothing below. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized. Alex's desperation wasn't just about the rocket or the betrayal. It was about something much deeper, something that Jacob wasn't fully seeing. I'll search for him, Jacob said, his resolve hardening. If he's still alive, I'll find him. We need to end this, for good. Jacob peered into the darkness, knowing that if Alex had survived the fall, he would be even more dangerous now. What had driven him to take such a reckless leap, and what would be waiting for Jacob when he reached the bottom? Jacob stood at the edge of the ravine, staring into the black abyss where Alex had just disappeared. His heart raced, his mind torn between fear and determination. If Alex had survived the fall, he would be even more unpredictable, more dangerous. Jacob knew that whatever happened next would be the culmination of everything they had worked toward. One final confrontation. Elon Gwyn, I'm going down, Jacob said, his voice steady despite the tension building within him. Be careful, Elon's voice came through, laced with concern. Don't go alone. I have no choice, Jacob replied, cutting off the argument before it could go any further. He wasn't about to let Alex slip away again, not after everything that had happened, not after the damage Alex had caused. Jacob quickly assessed the situation. The ravine was steep, with jagged rocks scattered along the sides. There was no easy path down, but Jacob had faced worse. His training had taught him how to handle himself in extreme conditions, and now it would be tested like never before. He reached into the trunk of his car and grabbed the rope he always kept in case of emergencies. Tying it to a nearby tree, he checked the knot carefully before testing the weight. Satisfied it would hold, he started to descend. The air grew colder as he made his way down, the steep incline making every step feel like an effort. The rope scraped against the rocks as Jacob lowered himself further into the ravine, his muscles straining with each movement. The darkness enveloped him, broken only by the faint light of his flashlight, which barely illuminated the path ahead. Jacob, please be careful, Gwen's voice echoed through the comms again. We don't know what he's capable of now. I know, Jacob said, his voice low, but I have to do this. The descent felt endless, each second dragging on as Jacob's thoughts raced. What had driven Alex to make that leap? Was it a final act of defiance, or had something inside him truly broken? The answers seemed just out of reach, but Jacob couldn't afford to slow down now. If Alex was alive, he needed to be stopped before he could hurt anyone else. After what felt like an eternity, Jacob's feet finally touched solid ground. He quickly unhooked the rope and tucked it back into his bag, his eyes scanning the dark landscape around him. The ravine was deep and narrow, the walls towering above him like jagged cliffs. The faint sound of water trickling nearby only added to the eerie silence. He could feel his pulse quicken as he began to move forward. Every step was cautious, every noise amplified in the quiet. It was almost as if the darkness itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, a noise broke the stillness. A sharp rustling came from a cluster of rocks a few yards ahead. Jacob froze, his eyes narrowing as he tried to locate the source of the sound. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Alex. His clothes were torn, his face bruised from the fall, but there was a wild look in his eyes, a look of someone who had nothing left to lose. In his hand, he held a small device, the faint glow of its screen illuminating his face. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. "What are you doing, Alex?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "This needs to end." Alex looked at him, his gaze intense, almost manic. "It's not over," he said, his voice hoarse. "You don't understand. I'm not just some kid. I'm the future." Jacob took a cautious step forward. "Alex, stop. This is madness. Whatever you think you're doing, it's not too late to make things right." But Alex's expression hardened. "You don't get it. This is bigger than you, bigger than anyone. I built it all, and now, it's mine to control." He raised the device in his hand, and for the first time, Jacob realized what it was, a detonator. "Alex, no!" Jacob shouted, his pulse racing. "Don't do it. You're going too far." But Alex's finger hovered over the button, his face contorted with a mix of rage and desperation. "I have to. It's the only way to show them all. To show everyone that I'm in control." Jacob took another step forward, trying to close the distance between them. "This isn't the answer. We can fix this together. Please, just put it down." For a long moment, the two stood in a tense standoff, the silence between them thick with the weight of their words. Then, Alex's gaze softened ever so slightly, just a flicker of doubt. Jacob seized the moment. He lunged forward, knocking the detonator from Alex's hand and sending it skittering across the rocks. Alex let out a strangled cry, his body going rigid. Before Jacob could react, Alex's hand shot out, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him close. "You don't understand," Alex whispered, his breath ragged. "They never saw me. They never believed in me. This is my chance to show them all." Jacob's heart clenched as he stared into Alex's eyes, filled with so much pain and anger. He could feel the weight of everything Alex had gone through, the years of neglect, the constant feeling of being overlooked. But Jacob knew one thing for sure. This was no longer about the rocket or the betrayal. This was about something much more fragile, something that Alex had lost long ago: hope. "Alex, I believe in you," Jacob said softly. "I know it's hard, but there's still time to make it right. You don't have to do this." Alex's hand shook as he stared at Jacob, the detonator lying forgotten on the ground between them. Would he listen to Jacob, or would his rage push him too far? The world seemed to stand still as Jacob locked eyes with Alex. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Alex's grip on Jacob's collar tightened, but there was a flicker of something, vulnerability, in his eyes. A hesitation that hadn't been there before. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest. He could see the conflict within Alex, the years of pain and frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He knew this was his moment. This was the chance to reach him, to stop the destruction before it went any further. But then, the silence was shattered by a loud crack, a sharp sound that seemed to echo from all around them. Alex's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, his grip loosened. Jacob took advantage of the distraction, shoving Alex's hand away from his collar and stumbling backward. His breath came in short gasps as he tried to regain his footing. The ground beneath him felt unsteady, as if the entire ravine was about to collapse. "Alex, listen to me," Jacob pleaded, his voice strained. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're better than this. You're not just a weapon, you're a person. Someone who can change the world for the better." Alex's expression twisted into something unreadable, a mask of anger and confusion. "You don't get it," he spat, his voice rising. "No one ever believed in me. No one ever saw me as anything but a freak. I was the smart kid, the outcast. I had to make them see. I had to make them fear me. Jacob took another step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Alex, fear isn't the answer. It'll only isolate you further. You don't need them to fear you. You need to be part of something bigger. You need to believe in yourself. Alex's eyes flickered, his emotions warring within him. But before Jacob could reach him, Alex stepped back, his body tense as if preparing for something. I've been alone my whole life, Alex said, his voice quieter now, but with an edge of defiance. And now I have something no one can take away from me. I'm not the same scared kid anymore. I'm not the one who needs saving. Jacob felt a pang of guilt hit his chest, but he refused to back down. He knew the truth. Alex was still a child at his core. He might have built a rocket, but he was still seeking something that couldn't be engineered. Acceptance, love, and the belief that he mattered. The ground beneath them shifted once more, but this time, it wasn't the ravine moving. It was the sound of footsteps. Jacob whirled around to see Elon and Gwen at the top of the ravine, looking down at them with concern etched on their faces. Their presence gave Jacob a moment of hope, but he knew it wasn't enough to stop Alex. We need to end this, Elon called out, his voice booming down to them. Alex, listen to us. You've made your point. It's time to stop the destruction before it's too late. Alex didn't respond, but his fingers twitched toward the detonator again. Jacob's breath caught. The final step could be taken any moment. He couldn't let Alex go down this path. Not after everything they had fought for. No, Alex, Jacob said firmly. You're better than this. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You're a genius, yes, but you're also more than that. You can do great things. You just have to believe it. Alex's eyes darted between Jacob, Elon, and Gwen. The tension in the air was palpable. Jacob could see the battle unfolding in Alex's mind. One part of him wanted to trust, to give in to the promise of a future that wasn't tainted by rage. But the other part of him, the part that had been rejected, ridiculed, and left alone for so long, wanted revenge, wanted validation. I'm not going to be a puppet for anyone anymore, Alex muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm done playing their games. Jacob's heart clenched, but he refused to let go. You don't have to play anyone's game, Alex. You can create your own future. You don't need revenge to be powerful. You already are. There was a long silence, the weight of the words hanging in the air. Jacob could see Alex's fingers twitch once more, but this time, there was something different in his eyes. Something softer. Before Jacob could make a move, Alex dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as they clutched the detonator. It slipped from his grip and hit the ground with a soft thud. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Why? Jacob asked, kneeling beside him. I don't know anymore, Alex admitted, his voice breaking. I wanted to be someone. I wanted to prove to everyone I wasn't just some kid with big ideas. But now, I don't know if it's worth it. Jacob didn't say anything at first. Instead, he placed a hand on Alex's shoulder, his voice gentle. You're not just a kid, Alex. You're someone who can do great things. You've already started. But you have to let go of the past and trust that you're enough. Alex looked up at Jacob, his eyes filled with tears. For the first time in so long, he didn't seem angry or defiant. He looked lost. I don't know how to let go, Alex whispered. Then let us help you, Jacob said softly. We're here. We've got your back. The words hung in the air as the night around them seemed to calm. Elon and Gwen made their way down the ravine, their steps slow but purposeful. We're not leaving you behind, Alex, Elon said, his voice filled with conviction. You've got a future ahead of you. But you have to make the choice to let go of the darkness. Alex looked up at the three of them, his face a mixture of doubt and hope. Would he take their hands and step away from the edge, or would the darkness consume him once more? The world held its breath as Alex sat on the cold, rocky ground, his mind a swirl of confusion, anger, and something else, hope. It was a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in a long time. Not since the days before he locked himself away in his room, designing rockets and building his world of steel and science. But now, in this moment, Everything was different. Jacob, Elon, and Gwen waited quietly, not pushing him, but not backing away either. They stood as his lifeline, silently offering him the chance to step back from the abyss. Alex's hands, still trembling, hovered above the detonator, but now they weren't as firm. His grip wasn't as certain. He could feel the power of the decision, the weight of what it meant to choose a different path. His fingers flexed around the button, but there was no final push, no final pull of the trigger. I can't, Alex muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind that whistled through the ravine. His eyes searched the ground, avoiding the looks of the others. I don't know how to stop. I've come so far. I've built something that could change everything. But I've been so angry, so hurt. I don't know who I am without it. Jacob's voice was soft but insistent. You don't have to be angry to be powerful. You've already shown us that, Alex. You've created something incredible, but you have a chance to do something even greater, something that's not about revenge, but about building a future. Your future. Elon stepped closer, his gaze steady but kind. The world doesn't need another weapon. It needs someone who can inspire change, someone who can lead with their heart, not their fists. Alex's breath hitched as the words sunk in. For the first time, he wasn't being judged, wasn't being told he wasn't enough. They weren't asking him to abandon his genius, his brilliance. They were asking him to use it for something better. Do you think I could be that person? Alex asked, looking up at Elon, then Jacob, and finally Gwen. Gwen smiled softly, her eyes warm with compassion. We believe in you, Alex. We've seen what you can do. You can make a difference. But you have to decide to let go of the anger first. It's the only way forward. Alex's gaze fell back to the detonator at his feet. He could still hear the hum of power that had been running through him, the anger and resentment that had driven him for so long. It felt like part of him, part of who he was. But the longer he looked at the device, the more he realized how small it seemed now, how insignificant compared to the future he could create if he let go. For a long moment, nothing changed. The wind carried the sound of distant waves crashing against the shore, a calming, rhythmic pulse. Alex slowly reached down and picked up the detonator, his fingers barely brushing the button. Then, with a single motion, he tossed it aside. It hit the ground with a dull thud, rolling away from him. I don't need this, Alex whispered to himself. I don't need to destroy everything to prove I'm worth something. Jacob's heart leapt in his chest as he watched Alex take a deep breath and stand up, his shoulders sagging slightly with the release of a burden he had carried for far too long. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was enough, a first step. Elon stepped forward, his voice steady and reassuring. This is just the beginning, Alex. You don't have to do it alone. We're here to help you. Whatever you choose, we'll be by your side. For the first time in what felt like years, Alex looked up and met their eyes without anger, without resentment. There was something raw in his gaze, something vulnerable, but also full of possibility. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time, it seemed possible. But just as Alex turned toward Jacob and Elon, the distant sound of sirens echoed across the ravine, growing louder by the second. Someone was coming. Someone who didn't know the changes that had taken place in Alex's heart. Would they recognize the shift in him? Or would they still see only the threat he had once been? The sirens cut through the stillness of the moment, their wail growing louder and closer. The air around them shifted, thick with anticipation. Alex froze, his gaze snapping to the horizon where the sound seemed to be coming from. He could feel the tension in his body, the old instincts of fear and fight creeping back into his veins. Who are they? Alex asked, his voice tight. They're not here for us, Elon said, his voice calm but sharp. At least, I don't think they are. We need to move now. Jacob nodded in agreement, his eyes scanning the surroundings. We need to get you out of here, Alex. We've come too far for anything to go wrong now. But before they could make any more moves, a sleek black SUV appeared at the edge of the ravine, screeching to a halt. The sound of the tires biting into the gravel was deafening. Alex's heart skipped a beat. The door of the SUV swung open, and out stepped a tall, imposing figure. Dressed in dark tactical gear, The man moved with an air of authority, his eyes scanning the area like a predator searching for its prey. Behind him, two others followed, equally intimidating, their hands resting near the holsters on their hips. "They're not with the authorities," Elon muttered under his breath, his expression hardening. Alex's stomach twisted. He recognized them. These weren't just any agents. They were the ones from his past, the ones who had been watching him, tracking his every move. The ones who had wanted to exploit his genius, twisted into something dangerous. "Alex Armitage," the lead agent called out, his voice cold and clipped. "We need to talk." Alex felt a surge of anger, the same feeling that had driven him all these years. He turned to Jacob and Elon, a new resolve setting into his chest. "You said I didn't need to destroy things to prove my worth. But he motioned to the agents. "They don't care about any of that. They only care about using me." Jacob stepped forward, putting a hand on Alex's shoulder. "You don't have to go back to that. You've already chosen a new path, and we'll help you stick to it." Elon's eyes narrowed as he studied the agents. "You know who we are, and you know what's at stake here. If you're planning to take Alex, you're going to have to go through us." The lead agent's lip curled into a sneer. "You don't understand, Musk. This isn't about you. It's about him. We need him back. He's too dangerous to be left to his own devices." Alex's pulse quickened, his fists clenching at his sides. He had known this moment would come. The people who had once tried to control him would never let him go freely. But now, as he looked at Elon and Jacob, something in him shifted again. He wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't the scared kid who had been taken advantage of. "I don't belong to anyone," Alex said, his voice steady but filled with defiance. "Not you. Not anyone." The agents seemed to pause at the force in Alex's words, as if they had expected him to be intimidated or broken. But instead, they found a boy who had decided, finally, that his life was his to control. "We're not going anywhere with you," Elon said firmly, stepping in front of Alex. "If you want him, you'll have to get through me." For a moment, the air was thick with the promise of confrontation. The agents studied Elon, Jacob, and Alex, the tension palpable. The lead agent took a step back, glancing at his team. "This isn't over, Armitage. You can't run from your past." Before Alex could say anything more, the agent turned and motioned for his team to retreat. They were gone as quickly as they had appeared, the sound of the SUV's engine fading into the distance. Alex exhaled slowly, his body sagging in relief, but his mind raced. "They're not going to give up," he said quietly. "I've made too many enemies." Gwen, who had been watching from the side, stepped forward. "Maybe, but you're not the same person you were. You've got people now, Alex. People who believe in you." Alex looked at the group, Elon, Jacob, Gwen, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something more than just the weight of his decisions. He felt the strength of those around him, the power of true support. "We've got to keep moving," Elon said, his voice decisive. "This won't be the last time they come looking for you. But we'll be ready." Alex nodded, his fear slowly being replaced with determination. "I'm ready." Just as they began to walk back toward their transport, Alex's phone buzzed. A single text message appeared on the screen, the words short but devastating. "You can't hide forever. We know where you are. We know what you're capable of." The world seemed to hold its breath as Alex read the message on his phone. His eyes flicked up from the screen, meeting Elon's, Jacob's, and Gwen's concerned faces. The words on the message echoed in his mind. "We know where you are. We know what you're capable of." The tension in the air grew thick. Every second felt like it dragged on longer than it should have. Alex's heart was pounding in his chest, and for a moment, he felt like a target once again. He had spent so many years running from his past, but now it seemed his past had finally caught up with him. "What are we going to do?" Gwen asked, her voice low, almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would make the situation worse. Elon's gaze didn't waver as he looked past Alex, scanning the horizon as if anticipating another threat. "We move. We don't stay in one place long enough to be caught." Jacob, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his face determined. "We're not going to let them take you, Alex. They might have been able to manipulate you before, but not anymore. You've got us now. Alex felt the weight of his team's words sink in. He wasn't alone. He had people he could trust, people who wanted him to succeed. But even that couldn't erase the creeping fear that lingered in his chest. I've never been so afraid in my life, Alex admitted quietly. Not even when I designed the rocket. Elon placed a reassuring hand on Alex's shoulder. Fear is natural, Alex, but you can't let it control you. You've come too far. They quickly gathered their belongings, getting ready to leave. Elon's demeanor was calm and collected, as always, but Alex could see the tension in his eyes. The danger was real. They weren't just running from a threat anymore. They were on the run from an organization that would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. As they made their way through the dense forest, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made his heart race. He knew they had to be careful. One wrong move, and they could be discovered. After a while, they reached a small clearing. Elon turned to Alex. We need to make contact with someone who can help us. We can't do this alone. Alex nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Do you know anyone? I have a few contacts, Elon said, but they're not exactly trustworthy. It's a risk. We don't have a choice, Jacob interjected. If we don't do something now, they'll be on us in hours. Alex glanced around at his team. He could see the determination in their eyes. They weren't giving up, not on him and not on their mission. He felt a sense of resolve building within him. This was his fight now, and he wasn't going to let anyone control his destiny again. Suddenly, a soft beep echoed from Elon's wrist device. He looked down, quickly analyzing the information. We have to move. They've tracked us. It's only a matter of time before they catch up. The group moved faster now, navigating through the dense brush with urgency. Elon led the way, his pace steady and sure. Alex, Jacob, and Gwen followed closely behind, trying to keep up. As the sky began to darken, the distant hum of an engine reached their ears. A sound that was both familiar and terrifying. The pursuit had begun. We need to split up, Elon said, his voice low but firm. Alex, Jacob, take the east trail. Gwen and I will take the west. We'll meet at the old cabin in the valley. Stay low, stay quiet. If they catch up, don't hesitate. Get to safety. Alex's stomach churned at the thought of splitting up, but he knew it was their only option. Got it, he said, his voice steady despite the anxiety rising within him. The group quickly dispersed, moving swiftly in opposite directions, each one of them fully aware that the stakes had just been raised. Alex's legs burned as he pushed himself harder, adrenaline coursing through his veins. His heart was pounding in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. They had to make it to the cabin. It was their only hope. As Alex and Jacob ran through the woods, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind them, too close, too fast. They weren't alone. Someone was gaining on them. Alex glanced back, his breath ragged. The shadows seemed to stretch and move, but in that fleeting moment, he thought he saw the glint of a familiar face, a face he never wanted to see again. The chase was on, and this time, it was personal. The eerie sounds of footsteps behind them grew louder, like a hunter closing in on its prey. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged bursts as he sprinted through the thick woods. He barely noticed the branches slapping against his face, the rough terrain beneath his feet. Every part of him was focused on one thing: survival. Jacob, running ahead of him, glanced back over his shoulder, his expression hard and determined. Keep going. We can't let them catch us. But Alex's mind raced with the possibility that they were already too late. He had no idea who was chasing them, but the sound of the footsteps behind them was unmistakable. It was more than just a few random hunters or trackers. It felt calculated, deliberate. The shadows around them seemed to stretch and shift with the twilight, playing tricks on Alex's exhausted mind. He dared a glance behind him, but all he saw were the darkening trees and underbrush. His thoughts raced. Was it one of Elon's old enemies? Could it be the organization from his past, the one that had first recognized his potential when he was just a boy? Alex! Jacob shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. Focus. We need to get to the cabin. Alex snapped back to the present, his legs burning from the exertion, but his mind was still trapped in the haze of uncertainty. The cabin. They needed to make it there. It was their only chance to regroup and figure out what to do next. The forest seemed endless, every turn and curve offering no sign of escape. The woods were deep, but also confusing, like a maze. The deeper they went, the more the shadows seemed to close in. The thought of being caught terrified him, but the real fear now was the possibility of what would happen if they were captured. What would they do to him? Alex glanced around, desperate for some kind of sign, something that could help him understand who was after them and why. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed in the distance, a familiar whirring noise. He froze. "That sound," Alex whispered, his voice tight with realization. "It's a drone." Jacob's head snapped around. "We're being hunted." Alex's stomach dropped as he realized the gravity of their situation. They weren't just being chased by people, they were being tracked by technology. Their every move was being monitored, and no matter how fast they ran, it felt as if they were being herded into a trap. "We need to hide," Alex said urgently. "Find cover, fast." Jacob nodded, pulling Alex behind a thick cluster of trees. The two of them crouched low, their breaths shallow as the sound of the drone grew closer. Every second felt like an eternity as the drone's buzzing filled the air, slicing through the otherwise quiet night. They waited, barely daring to breathe, as the drone hovered above them, its sensors scanning the ground. Alex could hear the mechanical whirring, feel the vibrations in the earth beneath him. His mind raced with possible strategies to escape, but nothing seemed promising. Their options were running out. "How long until the drone passes?" Jacob whispered, his eyes scanning the sky. "I don't know," Alex muttered, "but it'll be here any second." Just as he spoke, the whirring noise stopped. Alex's heart leapt, his body tensing. The drone had hovered above them for so long, its sensors scanning, its watchful eyes trained on them, but now it was gone. Had it found something else? Or was it just waiting for them to make a move? They waited in silence, eyes fixed on the empty sky, but the drone didn't return. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "For now, we're safe." Jacob nodded, but his face was grim. "For now, but we can't keep running. We need to confront whatever's coming." Alex didn't respond immediately. He knew Jacob was right. They couldn't keep running forever. They had to find out who was after them and why. The tension in his gut grew as he thought about the possibilities. His past, his invention, the reason they were being hunted. It all felt like a storm closing in on them. The drone was only the beginning. Whoever was chasing them had resources, technology, and the means to find them anywhere, anytime. Alex needed to act. He needed to find a way to use the one thing he had left, his mind. "We have to make it to the cabin," Alex said, standing up, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "And when we get there, we'll figure out how to fight back." Jacob met his gaze, a fire of determination in his eyes. "Let's do it." The two of them moved quickly, slipping through the trees with practiced stealth, as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Every step brought them closer to the cabin, but the weight of the situation pressed down on Alex's chest. It felt as if the walls were closing in around him, and no matter how fast he ran, no matter how far he pushed himself, the danger was always just behind him. As they continued forward, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig, felt like it could be a sign that they were being followed. The drone might have been gone for now, but it wasn't the only threat they faced. And then, just as they were nearing the cabin, they heard it, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps behind them. They were no longer alone. Alex and Jacob turned in unison, their eyes scanning the darkened woods. In the distance, the shadowy figure of a person emerged, walking toward them with purpose. They had been found. The figure in the distance was moving with purpose, its silhouette growing clearer against the darkening sky. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears as the reality of their situation began to settle in. They weren't just being hunted by faceless drones or technology anymore. This was real. Someone was coming for them, and it wasn't just a random person. Jacob stiffened beside him, his eyes narrowing as he took in the figure. Who do you think that is? I don't know, Alex whispered, his voice tight, but we don't have a choice. We need to deal with this. The figure grew closer, and as the shadows shifted, Alex could make out more details, tall, broad-shouldered, and moving with a deliberate pace. The steps were slow but confident. The presence felt ominous, like a storm brewing just on the horizon. Alex and Jacob instinctively backed up, crouching behind a cluster of trees, trying to remain hidden. Their breaths were shallow, their bodies tense with anticipation. This wasn't just another chase. It was something different. Whoever this person was, they had found them with ease, as if they knew exactly where to look. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours as they waited, watching, listening. The air was thick with the rustling of the trees, but that steady crunch of footsteps grew closer and closer. And then, as if the world had suddenly frozen in place, the figure stopped. Alex's breath caught in his throat. Had they been spotted? The stranger stood still, as if sensing something, or someone, was nearby. A few long moments passed before the figure began to move again, walking in the direction of the cabin. But there was something different in the way they moved now. They were aware of their surroundings, scanning the area with a calculated precision. Should we run? Jacob whispered, his voice a mere breath. Alex hesitated, his mind racing. Running wasn't an option anymore. The figure wasn't just a random person in the woods. It was someone who had come specifically for them. Running would only make them more of a target. No, Alex said finally, his voice firm. We stand our ground. Let's go. They moved, cautiously and silently, toward the cabin. Every step felt like it could be their last, but there was no turning back now. The figure ahead of them seemed unaware of their approach, moving slowly as if deliberately not rushing. Alex's mind raced. He had no idea what to expect, but there was one thing he knew for sure. They couldn't let this person get any closer. They crept up to the edge of the cabin, crouching low as they observed the figure from the shadows. Now, with the figure close enough, Alex could see that it wasn't just any stranger. This person was wearing a sleek, black suit, with dark, reflective glasses that obscured their face. The outfit seemed out of place for someone in the woods. It was too calculated, too clean. The strangers stopped in front of the cabin door, their posture rigid, eyes scanning the surroundings like a predator on the hunt. Alex could hear the faint hum of a device on the figure's wrist, a quiet beeping sound that sent a chill down his spine. Stay quiet, Alex whispered, pulling Jacob closer to the side of the cabin. They pressed against the wall, holding their breath, not daring to make a sound. The figure stepped closer to the door, but instead of attempting to enter, they reached into their pocket, pulling out a small device. Alex's eyes widened. It was a tracker, one of the advanced models that could scan for hidden electronics or signals. They were here to find something specific. Alex's stomach twisted. What do they want? Jacob murmured, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Before Alex could answer, the figure pressed a button on the device, and the air around them seemed to hum with energy. A moment later, the front door of the cabin opened with a quiet creak. Alex's pulse quickened. This was bad. The figure was inside. Go around the back, Alex instructed Jacob, his voice low and urgent. We'll sneak in from behind. We can't let them see us. Jacob nodded without a word, and the two of them moved swiftly, staying low to the ground. They circled around to the back of the cabin, where an old wooden door sat slightly ajar. Alex's heart raced with each step. What if the stranger was waiting for them? What if they were already trapped? When they reached the back door, Alex hesitated for only a moment before gently pushing it open. The door creaked ever so slightly, but they slipped inside without a sound. The inside of the cabin was dark, save for the faint glow of moonlight streaming through the cracks in the wooden walls. The air was thick with dust and the smell of pine, the kind of earthy scent that always made Alex feel at home. But tonight, it felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on them. They moved quickly, scanning the dark interior. The figure was nowhere in sight, at least, not yet. Alex's eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of their surroundings. There were a few old chairs, a battered couch, and a small kitchen area to the left. On the far wall, a dusty map of the area was pinned up with several locations marked in red ink. Jacob caught his breath. Alex, look. Alex followed Jacob's gaze to the far corner of the room, where a glowing, high-tech device sat on a table. The device was unlike anything Alex had seen before, sleek, metallic, and humming with energy. It was connected to a laptop, which displayed a series of coordinates. And then, at the bottom of the screen, a message flashed in bold letters, "Target located." Before Alex could speak, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. The figure had found them. The door to the main room slammed open, and the stranger's shadow filled the doorway. Alex's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped inside, scanning the room, eyes narrowing as they searched for the intruders. It was only a matter of time before they were discovered. The figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim light from outside. Alex could barely make out their features, but the cold, calculating stance told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a random person who stumbled upon their hiding spot. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Alex's mind raced. Every instinct told him to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The cabin was a dead end. The stranger was blocking the only exit. Jacob's hand was shaking beside him, but Alex gave him a steady, reassuring glance. "Stay calm," he whispered. "We have a plan." The figure took a step forward, their shoes scraping against the old wooden floor. It was clear they weren't in a hurry, which only made the tension in the room even more suffocating. Every movement felt deliberate, each footfall calculated. The stranger's eyes scanned the cabin, as if searching for something specific. Alex clenched his fists. They couldn't let this person get to the device on the table. Whatever it was crucial, perhaps the key to everything they were trying to understand. If they failed now, there would be no turning back. The stranger's gaze flicked toward the table. For a moment, Alex's heart stopped. Had they seen it? But no, the figure's eyes were quickly diverted, continuing their search of the room. In that split second, Alex made his move. He grabbed Jacob's arm and pulled him toward the far corner of the cabin, closer to the old kitchen area, out of the stranger's line of sight. "Go," Alex urged, his voice low but urgent. "Get to the back door. I'll hold them off." Jacob hesitated, his wide eyes filled with doubt. "What? No, we can't." "Now, Jacob," Alex hissed. "Go." Jacob nodded, still trembling, but he did as Alex told him. The two of them moved quickly, silently, across the creaky floorboards. Alex's heart hammered in his chest. He couldn't let them get caught. If Jacob reached the back door, they still had a chance to escape. But as they neared the corner, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "I know you're here," the stranger said, their voice smooth and cold. "There's no point in hiding." Alex froze, his breath caught in his throat. The figure wasn't just looking for them. They knew exactly where they were. How? Had they been tracked? Had the device given them away? "I won't ask again," the stranger continued, stepping further into the room. "Come out. Now." Alex's eyes darted around the room, searching for any way out. The back door was still within reach, but they'd never make it. They were trapped. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Alex's mind raced through every possible outcome. Escape was impossible. Fighting wasn't an option. They didn't know who this person was or what they were capable of. The only thing left was negotiation, or at least stalling long enough to figure out what to do next. He turned to Jacob, who was standing behind him, eyes wide with fear. "Stay behind me," Alex whispered, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. Jacob nodded, his hands trembling. Alex stepped forward slowly, his heart thudding in his chest. He had no idea who this person was or what they wanted, but he wasn't going to let them intimidate him. "Not now." "I'm not going anywhere," Alex called out, his voice echoing in the silence. "What do you want?" The figure paused, their head tilting slightly as they assessed Alex. Then, slowly, they spoke. "You're more resourceful than I expected," the stranger said, a hint of amusement in their voice. "I'll give you credit for that. But it's over now. You've been running long enough. It's time to stop." Alex's mind raced. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about something bigger, something they still didn't understand fully. "What do you mean, stop?" Alex demanded. "Who are you?" The stranger took a step closer, their gaze never leaving Alex's face. I'm the one who's been following you, watching your every move. And now, it's time for you to come with me. A chill ran down Alex's spine. They weren't just dealing with an ordinary person. This was someone who had been tracking them for days, maybe even longer. But why? We're not going anywhere with you, Alex said firmly, his voice gaining strength. Not until you tell us who you are and why you're after us. The figure's expression remained unreadable, but Alex could see the tension in their jaw. They didn't want to reveal their true intentions, at least, not yet. You'll understand soon enough, the stranger replied, their voice cold and indifferent. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Suddenly, a sharp, mechanical whirring sound filled the room, followed by a soft beep. The stranger's eyes shifted to their wrist, where a small device was flashing a bright red light. Time's up, the stranger said, their voice now tinged with urgency. They turned their gaze back to Alex. If you don't come with me willingly, things will get much worse for you. And for your friend. Alex's heart sank. They were running out of time. The stranger wasn't just a threat to them. Jacob was in danger too. Before Alex could react, the figure lunged forward with lightning speed, grabbing Alex's arm with a vice-like grip. Alex tried to break free, but the stranger's hold was unrelenting. Let him go, Jacob shouted, his voice full of fear. The stranger ignored him, dragging Alex toward the door with terrifying strength. Alex's mind raced, trying to think of a way to break free, but the grip on his arm was like iron. Alex, Jacob cried, his voice breaking with desperation. No. But before Alex could even form a plan, the world around him seemed to blur. There was a sudden flash of light, bright, blinding, and then nothing. Alex's vision went black as the world around him spun out of control. The last thing he heard was the sound of Jacob's voice, distant and fading. Had they been captured? Or was there still a chance to escape? Alex awoke with a sharp intake of breath, his mind a whirl of confusion and panic. His head throbbed, and the cold, metallic surface beneath him felt like a harsh contrast to the warmth of the cabin. His eyes fluttered open, only to be met with blinding light overhead. The world around him was white, sterile, clinical, and unfamiliar. He pushed himself up slowly, his body groggy and stiff. As he looked around, he realized he was no longer in the cabin, no longer in the safety of the woods. He was in a brightly lit room, small and suffocating. A low hum filled the air, the sound of machinery or some kind of technological device running nearby. Panic surged through him again, but he forced himself to take slow, steady breaths. His heart was pounding, but there was no time to lose. What had happened? Where was Jacob? Was he here too? Jacob, Alex called out, his voice hoarse and raw from the shock of waking up in an unknown place. There was no immediate response. Alex's eyes darted across the room, searching for any sign of his friend. He could hear his own breath and the hum of machines, but beyond that, the silence was oppressive. He tried to sit up, only to realize that his hands were bound. Panic clawed at him, but he refused to let fear control him. He tugged at the restraints, but they held firm. Whoever had taken them wasn't going to make it easy. A soft click echoed through the room, and the door opened slowly. Alex's eyes snapped toward it, and his breath hitched when he saw the figure standing in the doorway. It was the stranger, the same person who had confronted them in the cabin, the one who had dragged him here, the one who had promised that things would get worse if they didn't comply. The stranger stepped inside, their expression unreadable. Alex's heart skipped a beat. "Where's Jacob?" Alex demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "What have you done to him?" The stranger didn't respond immediately. Instead, they moved to a table in the corner of the room, flipping a switch that caused a screen to light up. A soft, high-pitched sound filled the air, and Alex realized it was a signal, an alert, maybe. "Jacob is fine," the stranger said, their voice cold and indifferent. For now. For now." Alex repeated, his blood boiling. "What do you want from us? Why are you doing this?" The stranger turned to face him, their eyes narrowing slightly. "You're more important than you realize, Alex. You've stumbled upon something much bigger than you can comprehend. Alex's mind raced. He had been thinking the same thing ever since the stranger had first appeared. There was something behind all of this, something larger than just them, something that connected them to a deeper conspiracy. But what? You've been following us, Alex said, his voice now more controlled. Following me? But why? What's so special about Jacob and me? The stranger remained silent for a moment, as though weighing whether to answer. Finally, they spoke, their tone almost begrudging. Jacob, and you, are part of something that could change the world. And I need you to understand something. You're not just running from a threat. You're running toward a revelation, a truth that has been hidden for years. Alex's mind whirled, his thoughts tumbling over each other. The truth? What truth? Was this about the device? The one Jacob had been working on? Before Alex could ask another question, the stranger's eyes flicked to the screen in the corner of the room. Their expression changed, hardening. We don't have much time, the stranger said. You've come too far to back out now. But you need to choose, Alex. We're at a crossroads. Alex was confused, his heart racing. A crossroads? What did they mean? There had to be more to this. More to the device. More to what had been happening all this time. Choose. Alex repeated. Choose what? The stranger stepped closer, their voice lowering to a near whisper. You can walk away from all of this. Leave. Forget everything. Go back to your normal life. Or, you can help us. Help us unlock the potential of what you and Jacob have discovered. Alex's eyes widened as the stranger's words sank in. What was this? Some kind of ultimatum? It didn't make sense. He couldn't just walk away. There was too much at stake. Jacob was part of this. They were all part of it. You're not giving me a choice, Alex said firmly, his voice sharp. You're threatening me. The stranger's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. You misunderstand. I'm not threatening you. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself. Alex's mind raced. What was this really about? The stranger's words were carefully chosen, manipulative. But were they true? Was there a greater purpose in what they had found? A truth that could change everything? Before Alex could respond, the door to the room opened again. This time, another figure entered, one he hadn't expected. Jacob. Alex. Jacob's voice cracked with relief. You're okay. Alex's heart skipped a beat, but then his relief was quickly overshadowed by the sight of Jacob's face. He looked pale, disheveled, but unharmed. There was something in his eyes, though, something different. Something changed. Jacob, are you? Alex started to ask, but Jacob held up a hand, silencing him. We need to talk, Jacob said, his voice surprisingly calm. But not here. The stranger's gaze flicked between the two boys, their expression unreadable. For a moment, the tension in the room hung thick in the air. Then, without a word, the stranger stepped aside, allowing Jacob to approach Alex. Jacob knelt beside him, his face serious. Listen to me, Alex. This isn't what you think. We're part of something much bigger, something we don't fully understand yet. But we need to decide what we're going to do with it. Alex's mind raced. What was Jacob talking about? The stakes were higher than ever, and he had no idea who to trust anymore. But one thing was clear. They were on the verge of uncovering something monumental, and the choices they made next would determine everything. Alex and Jacob stood on the edge of something incredible, but as they faced the stranger's ultimatum, the question loomed. Could they handle the truth? Or would they be consumed by the very thing they had uncovered? The room was heavy with silence as Alex and Jacob locked eyes. They both knew something monumental was happening, but neither of them could fully grasp what that meant. The stranger stood motionless by the door, watching them with an unreadable expression, waiting. Alex could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, every heartbeat echoing in the small, sterile room. Jacob's face was pale, but there was a resolve in his eyes that Alex had never seen before. He wasn't the same person he had been just a day ago. Alex could sense that Jacob had already made up his mind about something, about the path ahead. You're not going to like this, Jacob said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension. But we don't have a choice. Alex furrowed his brow. What do you mean? What's going on, Jacob? You're acting like this is the end of something. Jacob hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the stranger who stood waiting by the door, still silent but ever present. The stranger's gaze was fixed on them, but there was no hostility in it, only a strange kind of expectation. We're in this now, Alex, Jacob continued. We've uncovered something bigger than us. And the people behind this, these people who've been watching us, they don't want us to back out. Not now. Alex shook his head, trying to process the weight of Jacob's words. What are you saying? Are you saying we should just join them? Help them? Jacob's eyes darkened. I'm not saying we should help them, Alex. But we have to face the fact that there's no going back. We're involved now. There's no escaping this. Alex felt a chill run down his spine as the realization hit him. Whatever was happening, whatever Jacob and he had stumbled into, it wasn't something small. It was something far-reaching, something dangerous, and there was no walking away from it. The stranger spoke at last, their voice cutting through the tension. You understand, don't you? There are two choices here. You can accept what's coming and be a part of it, or you can refuse and face the consequences. But make no mistake, there is no neutral ground. Alex's stomach twisted. Consequences? What kind of consequences? The stranger's expression remained unchanged. You've seen the device. You've seen what it can do. We are on the brink of a new era, and either you'll be a part of shaping it, or you'll be swept aside by it. Alex's mind was spinning. The device. The technology that Jacob had been working on. What had they uncovered? Was it the key to some kind of power? A power so great that it could reshape the world? And what if we refuse? Alex asked, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. What if we walk away? What happens then? The stranger's eyes glinted with something cold. Then you'll have to live with the knowledge that you could have changed everything. But you didn't. Alex swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. The gravity of the situation was suffocating. It wasn't just about them anymore. Whatever they had uncovered, whatever this was, it was bigger than their personal fears or doubts. They were at the precipice of something world-changing, and they couldn't just ignore it. He turned to Jacob, searching his friend's face for any sign of hesitation. But Jacob's gaze was unwavering, a quiet determination etched into every line of his face. I think you know what you need to do, Alex, Jacob said softly. We can't undo what we've already done, but we can make a difference. We can control what happens next. Alex's heart was pounding in his chest, the pressure of the decision suffocating him. His mind raced through every possibility, every outcome. Could they really trust the stranger? Could they trust the people behind all of this? Or were they just pawns in a much larger game? Before he could respond, the stranger stepped closer, their presence almost overwhelming. Time is running out, they said. The decision is yours. But remember, hesitation is just another form of choice. Alex's throat tightened, and he felt the weight of his friend's eyes on him, the pressure of the moment pushing him toward a decision. What would he do? He could feel the pull of something larger than himself, something that promised power, change, and perhaps even danger. But was it worth the risk? Was it worth trusting the people who had brought them to this point? I don't know what's coming next, Alex said finally, his voice trembling slightly. But I do know this. We have to stick together. Whatever happens, we face it together. We're not alone in this. Jacob nodded, his expression softening. I'm with you, Alex. No matter what. Alex took a deep breath, his resolve solidifying. Then we'll face whatever comes next. Together. The stranger regarded them both silently, as though appraising their decision. For a moment, the room was still. Then, with a faint nod, the stranger turned away, walking toward the door. Very well, the stranger said. You've made your choice. The door clicked shut behind them, and Alex and Jacob were left alone again. The tension in the air was thick, but there was also a strange sense of clarity. They had made their decision. They were no longer running from whatever was coming. They were going to face it head-on. Alex's heart was still racing, but now there was a sense of purpose. Whatever the truth was, whatever they had uncovered, it was up to them to decide how it would all end. As Alex and Jacob stood in the now quiet room, their minds still reeling from the gravity of their decision, The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Someone else was coming, and they had no idea what would happen next. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing through the hallway outside the room. Each step reverberated off the sterile walls, a rhythm that seemed to match Alex's rapid heartbeat. He glanced at Jacob, who seemed equally tense, his face pale but set with determination. "What now?" Alex whispered, his voice low and cautious. Jacob didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate breath, his eyes scanning the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. The footsteps came closer, and then, without warning, the door handle turned. It was an unsettling sound, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. The door creaked open, and a tall figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, and Alex could just make out the sharp features of a woman. She closed the door behind her with a soft click, her eyes locking onto theirs immediately. "I see you've made your decision," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with an unspoken authority. Her gaze flickered to the table where the device sat, the object of all their confusion and fear. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. There was something unnerving about her presence, something he couldn't place. She wasn't like the stranger they had encountered earlier. This woman was different, in control. "Who are you?" Jacob asked, his voice steady but filled with suspicion. The woman smiled slightly, almost as if she'd expected the question. "My name is Alara, and I've been waiting for you too." Alex's mind raced, trying to piece together the situation. Waiting for them? She knew who they were. But how? And why was she here now? "I don't understand," Alex said, his voice tight. "Why have you been waiting for us? What is all of this?" Alara's expression softened, and for a moment, she looked almost sympathetic. "You've uncovered something monumental, something that could change everything. The device, the technology you found, it's not just some science experiment. It's a key to unlocking something far greater than you realize." Jacob frowned. "A key to what?" Alara took a step closer, her gaze intense. "A key to the future, to a new world. The technology you've been working with is far more advanced than anything you've encountered before. And you, Alex, you are the one who has the potential to take it further. Much further." Alex's head was spinning. This wasn't what he had imagined. He had thought they were just uncovering some hidden secret, some breakthrough technology. But this was bigger. Far bigger than anything he had ever expected. "What are you saying?" Jacob interjected. "What do you want from us?" Alara's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't want anything from you, Jacob, but you both have a choice. You can walk away, and you'll never hear from us again. Or you can take what you've uncovered and help us create a future that is beyond anything you've ever dreamed of." Alex felt his throat dry up as he processed her words. She was offering them a chance to be a part of something bigger, something world-changing. The possibility of being at the forefront of a technological revolution was intoxicating. But at what cost? "Why us?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you choose us?" Alara took a deep breath, her expression thoughtful. "You didn't choose this path, Alex, but you were chosen. There's something inside you, something in your mind that has the potential to unlock the next step of this technology. It's why Jacob brought you into this in the first place. It's why you're here." Alex glanced at Jacob, who was looking back at him with an unreadable expression. There was something more going on here than he had realized, something Jacob wasn't telling him. But now wasn't the time to press him for answers. They were both in this together, whether they liked it or not. "So what happens if we refuse?" Alex asked, his voice gaining strength. "What if we don't want any part of this?" Alara's eyes seemed to darken for a moment, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Refusing is not an option, Alex. The decision has already been made. You've already seen too much. There's no turning back now." A cold shiver ran through Alex's body. He wasn't sure if she was threatening them or simply stating a fact. Either way, the weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Jacob stepped forward, his voice firm. "What are you asking us to do?" Alara's gaze softened, but there was a glimmer of something dangerous behind her eyes. "I'm asking you to help us bring about a new world. A world where the boundaries of science, technology, and human potential are shattered. Together, we can unlock the full power of the device and create something no one has ever dreamed of. Alex's mind raced as he processed her words. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a chance to change the world. But at what cost? Was this the path they should take? Suddenly, the weight of the decision became unbearable. There were no easy answers, no clear path forward. But one thing was certain. The choice they made today would shape the future forever. I don't know if we're ready for this, Alex said, his voice filled with uncertainty. We don't know what's at stake. What if we're wrong? Alara's eyes softened again, and she stepped closer, her voice gentle. You don't have to be ready, Alex. You just have to make the choice. The rest will come with time. And I promise you, the world will never be the same again. The silence in the room was deafening as Alex and Jacob exchanged a look. The weight of the decision loomed over them, and the future seemed both exciting and terrifying at the same time. They were standing on the edge of something vast, something unknown, and there was no turning back. As Alara's words hung in the air, the sound of a distant alarm began to blare, piercing the silence. Something was happening, something they hadn't prepared for. The world was shifting beneath their feet, and they had to make their choice, and fast. The blaring alarm pierced through the tension in the room, sending a jolt of adrenaline through Alex's veins. His heart pounded in his chest, as though each beat was urging him to make a decision right then and there. Alara's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos that was suddenly unfolding around them. The sound of the alarm was deafening, and the flashing red lights from the hallway outside sent an eerie glow into the room. "What's happening?" Jacob asked, his voice laced with anxiety. He looked toward the door, as if expecting someone, or something, dangerous to emerge. Alara didn't flinch. Her eyes remained fixed on Alex and Jacob, as if the emergency alarms were nothing more than a minor distraction. "It's time," she said simply. "The decision must be made now. You don't have the luxury of waiting any longer." Alex's mind was in overdrive. The urgency of the situation was undeniable. The room felt smaller, as though the walls were closing in on him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, and the enormity of the choice he faced was almost suffocating. Was he ready for this? Was this the future he wanted for himself? And for the world? The alarm grew louder, a constant reminder of the danger that seemed to loom just beyond the door. Something was coming, something that required immediate action. But what was the right choice? "I don't understand," Alex said, his voice wavering as he glanced at Alara. "If you're so sure about this, then why the alarms? Why all the secrecy? What's really going on here?" Alara's gaze sharpened, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something that resembled urgency in her eyes. "The alarms are for your protection, Alex," she said, her voice low but firm. "We are not the only ones who know about the device. There are others who will stop at nothing to get their hands on it. And they're closer than you think." Alex's stomach dropped. His pulse quickened. The weight of her words settled in, and a sense of danger he hadn't fully grasped until now flooded his mind. "You've been followed?" Jacob asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Alara nodded. "Yes. We have no time to waste. The choice is yours, and I cannot protect you forever. But what I can promise is this. If you decide to stand with me, you'll be a part of something extraordinary. If you choose to walk away, you will not be safe. The forces who seek this technology are ruthless." The room seemed to spin. Alex felt the walls closing in on him, and he glanced at Jacob for some sort of reassurance. But his friend's face was as pale as his own, uncertainty written all over him. "This is too big," Alex muttered. "We're just kids. How are we supposed to decide something like this?" Alara's expression softened, but there was still a steely edge to her gaze. "You're not just kids. You're the ones who discovered it. You have the knowledge and the potential to change the world, for better or worse. You've already made it this far. The question is, what will you do with it?" The door to the room suddenly slammed open, and a figure stepped into the room. Alex's heart skipped a beat as he saw the person standing in the doorway, a man in a dark suit, his face obscured by the shadows. "Time's up," the man said, his voice cold and authoritative. "The device must be secured, immediately. Alara didn't flinch. "We'll decide when it's time," she said, her tone unwavering. Alex's mind raced. Who was this man? Why was he so determined to get his hands on the device? What was really going on here? The man's eyes flickered toward Alex and Jacob, a sneer forming on his lips. "You think you have a choice? You think you can just walk away from this? You have no idea what you're dealing with. The device is more than just technology, it's a weapon, and we can't let it fall into the wrong hands." Alex's chest tightened. A weapon? This had never felt like a weapon. It had always felt like something that could change the world, something that could revolutionize everything. But hearing the man's words, hearing the coldness in his voice, made Alex realize just how much he didn't know. "Alara," Alex said, his voice shaky but firm. "What's the truth? What are we really dealing with here?" Alara turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "The truth is that the device has the power to shape the future. It can either be used to elevate humanity to unimaginable heights, or it can be used to destroy everything we know. That's why there are people, dangerous people, who will do anything to control it." The man in the doorway stepped forward, his eyes locked on Alex. "You don't understand. You've unleashed something that was never meant to be found, and now you have to make a choice. You can either hand over the device, or you can die trying to keep it." Alex's breath caught in his throat. The weight of the man's words hit him like a physical blow. He had never imagined it would come to this, a fight for his life. He had been so focused on the technology, so consumed by the possibilities it represented, that he hadn't fully considered the dangers. The consequences of their discovery were far more serious than he could have ever imagined. Jacob stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "We're not handing it over," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Alara's eyes flickered toward Jacob, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "I knew I was right to trust you." Alex felt a surge of determination flood his chest. They had come this far. They couldn't back down now, not when the fate of the world hung in the balance. "Okay," Alex said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "Let's finish this. We're in this together." As he spoke, the sound of footsteps grew louder from the hallway, and a new wave of tension gripped the room. There was no turning back now. They had made their choice. Just as Alara began to move toward the device, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of voices shouting. They were here. The enemy had arrived. The final battle for control of the device had begun. The crash echoed through the narrow hallway, followed by the heavy thud of boots slamming against the floor. Alex's heart skipped a beat, his entire body tensing in anticipation. He had heard stories of people willing to kill for power, but now he was in the midst of it. This wasn't some theoretical battle. It was real, and it was happening right now. "Alara, what do we do?" Jacob's voice was strained, his eyes darting toward the door as he clenched his fists. There was fear there, but also something else, determination. He wasn't going to back down, not now. Alara didn't flinch. Her calm demeanor had always been one of her most impressive qualities, but in the face of imminent danger, it took on a new level of gravity. "We hold our ground," she said, her voice steady. "We're not going to let anyone take the device from us." Alex nodded, his stomach twisting with uncertainty. He wasn't sure if they were ready for this fight. The man at the door had made it clear that this wasn't a negotiation. It was a matter of life and death. The footsteps grew louder, and with each step, Alex's pulse quickened. He could feel the weight of the device in his hands, a constant reminder of the responsibility and the danger it represented. But was he ready to wield that power? Was anyone ever truly ready for something so monumental? The door rattled as someone on the other side slammed their body against it. Alara turned toward Alex and Jacob, her eyes narrowing. "Get ready," she said quietly, as if preparing for an inevitable battle. "When they come through that door, we need to be ready." Alex swallowed hard, his grip tightening around the device. His mind raced. What would it mean to defeat these people? What would happen after? Could they really protect the device? Could they really change the world with it? The door buckled under another forceful blow, and then, just as Alex thought the door would give way entirely, it burst open. 5 men in dark suits stormed into the room, their eyes scanning every corner as if searching for something. They were quick, efficient, and terrifyingly calm. The man who had spoken earlier, the one who had warned them about the weapon, stepped forward, his cold eyes locking onto Alex. "You really think you can stop us?" the man sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're just children. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Alex's breath caught in his throat. It was all coming to a head now. There was no turning back. "I don't know about that," he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the fear that gripped him. "But I know one thing. We're not giving it to you." The man took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You don't have a choice in the matter. Step aside." Alara moved to stand in front of Alex and Jacob, her stance unwavering. "We won't let you take it," she said, her voice like steel. The man chuckled darkly, then signaled to his men. Without warning, one of them lunged forward, grabbing Alara by the arm, attempting to pull her away. But Alara was quicker. With a fluid motion, she broke free from his grip and spun around, using her body's momentum to throw him into the wall. "Get them!" the man shouted, his voice rising with fury. A fight broke out in an instant. Alex's heart raced as he watched Alara expertly fend off one of the attackers, while Jacob grabbed a chair and swung it at another. But the men were trained, and Alex could see that they were outnumbered and outmatched in terms of physical strength. Suddenly, Alex heard a loud crash and saw one of the attackers pulling out a gun. His blood ran cold. This had just escalated from a simple confrontation to a life-or-death struggle. "Alara!" Alex shouted. She turned in his direction just in time to see the man with the gun aiming it directly at her. Without thinking, Alex acted. He rushed forward, grabbing a nearby metal object, and hurled it at the attacker's hand, knocking the gun out of his grip. The attacker growled in frustration and lunged at Alex, but Alex was faster. His heart pounded in his chest as he threw another object at the man, this time striking him in the head. The attacker crumpled to the ground. "Nice move," Jacob shouted, but there was no time for celebration. More men were pushing forward, and the room was filling with the sound of chaos. Alara stood tall, her eyes locked on the man who had led the group. The fight between them seemed inevitable, and it was clear that only one side could walk away from this. But Alex had a different plan. He stepped forward, keeping the device in his hands. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice booming through the chaos. "This ends now." For a brief moment, the room went still. Everyone paused, their eyes on him. Alara glanced at Alex, and for a split second, a flicker of understanding passed between them. The man in the suit raised an eyebrow. "What are you going to do with that? You're nothing more than a child, playing with forces you don't understand." Alex held his ground, despite the pounding in his chest. "Maybe, but I understand one thing. This isn't just about the device. It's about what we choose to do with it." The words hung in the air, thick with tension. Everyone seemed to be waiting for the next move. Alex's mind raced, and as he looked around the room, he realized that it wasn't just the device that mattered. It was the people who would shape the future with it. "Give it to me," the man demanded again, his voice full of menace. "You don't have the strength to make this decision. I'll take it from you." "No," Alex said, shaking his head. "This is our choice. Our world." The room was silent for a heartbeat, and then, with a speed that took everyone by surprise, Alex slammed the device into the control panel nearby, activating its final function. There was a sudden, blinding flash of light. And then, nothing. The world fell into silence. As the light faded, Alex felt a strange calm wash over him. The device had activated, but what had it done? What had they just unleashed? And more importantly, had they made the right choice?